Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 5th of September 2011, the podcast that puts dirty words into your autocorrect. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's short sheet the bed of the news of the bogus. An Illinois man is facing 75 years in prison. Did he commit murder, rape, armed assault? No. His heinous crime was videotaping police officers in the line of duty.
The police in these recordings are not necessarily the ones breaking the law. It's the people recording the police. Recording audio of law enforcement without their consent is considered a crime in a dozen states, including Illinois.
To call what I did a crime is ridiculous.
Michael Allison publicly recorded law enforcement in Robinson, Illinois. Now he's charged with 5 felonies with 15 years in prison for each count. That's a total of 75 years if convicted.
75 years in prison. And it's just so unbelievable.
Allison could spend the rest of his life behind bars. Those laws technically make it illegal to record on-duty law enforcement officials without their consent. The penalty for that crime here in Illinois is the same as rape.
They're actually trying to say that I have committed a crime and it's a Class 1 felony.
As bad as rape.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
And what were the cops doing there in the first place?
Officers said his unregistered cars violated a local ordinance. They eventually fined Allison and confiscated his cars. Allison went to the Robinson Police Department with his recorder in hand. He told Chief Bill Ackman, seen here in this file video, that his officers selectively and illegally enforced the ordinance. Allison eventually filed a lawsuit. Allison thinks that's why he was denied a court reporter during his ordinance hearing. So Allison told the judge he would record the hearing himself for documentation. Police later confiscated Allison's recorder. They also arrested him on 5 felony eavesdropping charges for everything he had recorded.
So let me get this straight. Cops were getting on him about having cars on his own property, which is his right to have, which he was repairing, which is his right to do, and he recorded their bogus activity. He was also denied the right to a court reporter at his own hearing, so he recorded it himself, and because of all this, solely because he wanted to have documentation of what these armed busybody thugs were doing to him, he's now facing 75 years in prison. How far gone do you have to be to not see this as a police state?
It's not just Allison. A similar situation happened to another Illinois man. This YouTube video shows Chicago police arresting Christopher Drew for selling art without a permit. Drew also had an audio recorder in his pocket, but never had the consent of police to record their comments. Now Drew is heading to trial for eavesdropping and could go to prison for what you just saw.
Think about this. If the police want to, they can wear a wire and record you without your knowledge, without your ability to consult an attorney, and use that as evidence against you. But if you even try to do the same to them, to hold them to the same standard, you get arrested. Unbelievable.
Whether it's dash cam videos or even sting operations, the state law allows police officers to record citizens without their consent.
If you turn on a recorder to record the exact same conversation that they are recording, you're considered a felon, and they're protected by the statute.
All these police officers who were recorded tasing, punching, or shoving unarmed citizens, sit down! None of them served any prison time.
Well, at least we've still got the press corps able to keep an eye on them. Or do we?
While we were recording video inside the courthouse for this report, a sheriff's deputy came out of a courtroom and asked us why we were recording.
Does it matter?
My response you just heard in that off-camera conversation is the only audio we can play for you. Our lawyers advised us not to let you hear the deputy because we didn't have his consent to record him.
Wait. The news can't play the recording? The news, which has free reign to go wherever they like, record people without their knowledge, and put it all over the national media, can't record comments from an officer telling them why they can't record? And the TV station just caved to it. There was a time when reporters had this thing called courage. Courage which ensured the freedom of the press enshrined in the First Amendment. Looks like that's going away too. The day after this report aired, prosecutors got an extension from the court because they needed more time to prepare. More time to do what? They have the evidence, they have the videotapes that Allison made, and Allison isn't even denying he did it. The evidence here is straightforward. So let's see what violations the Crawford County government is racking up here. First Amendment violations, both of free speech and a free press. Fourth Amendment violations by seizing the videos to begin with. Fifth Amendment violations of due process. Sixth Amendment violations of the right to a speedy trial. Eighth Amendment violations, because if 75 years in prison for eavesdropping isn't cruel and unusual punishment, I don't know what is. Ninth Amendment violations of guaranteed rights reserved by the people. And 14th Amendment violations of equal protection under the law. Americans, you have an absolute right to privacy, a right that is continually being taken away from us by armed bullies wearing badges. But these bullies are supposed to work for us. They're public employees paid for with taxpayer dollars. They have no reasonable expectation of privacy, and their bosses, that's us, have every right to know what they're up to when they're on the clock, especially when they continually act in violation of our most basic liberties. The cops want to record us because, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. Oh, if only that were true. But the behavior of these disgraces to their badges shows quite clearly that they very much do have something to hide, and we all have a right to know what it is. If we don't, we're in a police state. It's time to wake up and hold these thugs accountable en masse. So AT&T made a bid to purchase wireless telecom rival T-Mobile because, well, that's just what they do, isn't it? However, the Justice Department has blocked the merger, which would, in the words of New York Times, reshape the industry. Interesting phrase, reshape the industry. It doesn't actually say anything, but it's effective at getting people all panicky. According to the complaint, quote, AT&T's elimination of T-Mobile as an independent, low-priced rival would remove a significant competitive force from the market. Thus, unless this acquisition is enjoined, customers of mobile wireless telecommunication services likely will face higher prices, less product variety and innovation, and poorer quality services due to reduced incentives to invest than would exist absent the merger. See if that sounds similar to this quote. AT&T's takeover of T-Mobile would stifle choice and innovation in the market, harm consumers, and lead to higher prices and fewer jobs nationwide. What am I quoting this time? I'm quoting thousands of comments posted to the FCC's website. Yes, thousands, all saying the same thing, verbatim. This is because advocacy groups put up web pages that let users send this scripted comment to the FCC. Apparently, the website started popping up just a week before the comment deadline, and the group sent out an email blast to hundreds of thousands of people. To post the comment, all a recipient had to do was click the link in the email and then click send. In just a few days, the comments on the FCC's site went from under 100 all the way up to 10,000. It seems like the driving force behind many of these sites is none other than Sprint, which would lose its dominion over AT&T if the merger were to take place. So are they really supporting the consumers, or are they supporting a big corporation who doesn't want to face some real competition for once? A spokeswoman for Sprint said, quote, Sprint applauds the DOJ for conducting a careful and thorough review and for reaching a just decision. Today's action will preserve American jobs, strengthen the American economy, and encourage innovation. Let me translate that for you. Here's what she really meant. Sprint applauds the DOJ for blindly following obviously scripted comments on its page and reaching a decision that will preserve our massive profits. Today's action will preserve Sprint executives' salaries, strengthen our control of the market, and encourage corporatism. See, it's all about having a good translator. What's interesting about both the DOJ and Sprint is that they both claim to be able to foretell the future. The fact is, most mergers fail, and statistically the biggest likelihood will mean that the resulting merged company wouldn't be any bigger than AT&T is now. And if a merger does end up working for them, why should the DOJ step in to stop it just because Sprint starts whining? The reason AT&T wants to merge with T-Mobile is so they can greatly expand their 4G network, which is currently dominated by Verizon. There isn't a whole lot of overlap between AT&T and T-Mobile. They don't really compete with each other that much, so it won't be reducing any competition. But if the merger works, it'll build a bigger 4G network and give consumers who want the technology a reasonable alternative to Verizon. How exactly is that bad? AT&T also figures the expanded network will cut their costs by $40 billion. That's as good as $40 billion in new investments for new devices, creating jobs, and servicing customers. T-Mobile can't compete with that on their own. They don't have anywhere near the infrastructure to roll out 4G, and the numerous federal, state, and local regulations about where cell towers can be built, how many there can be, what frequencies can be used, and other things that create artificial shortages, driving the price up for everyone, make it so difficult for them and the other providers to compete. No one is forcing T-Mobile to merge with AT&T. They want to because they believe it'll be better for their company and their customers. Building a new major player in the 4G market will increase competition, not eliminate it. AT&T and T-Mobile want to merge because they feel it'll give them a competitive advantage. Sprint opposes the merger because they feel exactly the same thing. As for reduced incentives to invest, that's exactly what this complaint does. I would think an expanded 4G network would attract more investors, but the DOJ stepping in places a great amount of uncertainty in the market, which is sure to make investors balk. AT&T stock plunged over 5% after the DOJ announced the suit, and that means fewer jobs. As the Communications Workers of America union knows, they support the merger. They're predicting the merger will result in 5,000 new jobs, quote, with quality wages and benefits and good working conditions, according to their press release. The DOJ preventing the merger will only ensure that this doesn't happen. Fewer jobs, higher prices, and less innovation. Precisely what the DOJ claims they want to avoid. That's corporatism for you. If the DOJ really cared about consumers, why wouldn't they go after Congress for making the numerous unnecessary corporatist regulations making it hard for small carriers to compete with the big guys to begin with? Even though this is an American podcast, we are nonetheless aware that the rest of the world exists, and trying to keep an eye on what's going on elsewhere as well. And again, we see that blatant corporatism is hardly limited to America. Recently, a Dutch judge has banned the sale of 3 smartphones made by Samsung in several European countries. But hey, this is Europe. They're just looking out for the people, right? These smartphones must explode or be coated with lead paint or something, right? No. This was done after a complaint by Apple, who said, "We don't want people competing with us and taking our money." That's not an exact quote. I'm paraphrasing a little. The judge ruled that these smartphones violated patents held by Apple and ruled that they cannot be sold in the Netherlands. Under the terms of the European Union, that also means they cannot be sold in any other European country that has the same patent laws. A spokeswoman for the court said, quote, "Samsung smartphones cannot be sold. That goes for the Samsung S, the Samsung S2, and the Samsung Ace. The patents also apply to other European countries, which means the ban on sales applies to other countries where the patents are valid." She also said, "We don't care about consumers and about giving them choice. This is about bowing to our corporate masters." Well, okay, she didn't exactly say that part. I was paraphrasing again. Once again, we see that, far from promoting the introduction of new technologies and encouraging entrepreneurship, patents are used time and time again as a club for big corporations to wield dominance in the market, at taxpayers' expense and in detriment to our basic liberties to purchase whatever product we want from whomever we can get to sell it to us. Meanwhile, in an act of astounding chutzpah, Apple has come out attacking Samsung of monopolistic practices. Attorneys for Apple said, quote, "Having obtained this ill-gotten monopoly power, Samsung has engaged in a relentless campaign of illegal and abusive assertions of its declared essential patents to try to coerce Apple into tolerating Samsung's continued imitation of the iPad and iPhone." I was not paraphrasing on that one. Meanwhile, Samsung has to delay the introduction of their smartphones not only in the Netherlands, but Germany and Australia as well, while they fight Apple's attempts to claim patent infringement. The ban may be extended to the United States if the ITC sides with Apple. Dictionary.com defines hypocrisy as 1. A pretense of having a virtuous character, moral or religious beliefs or principles, etc. that one does not really possess. 2. A pretense of having some desirable or publicly approved attitude. 3. Anything said or done by Apple Incorporated. Actually, that third one may not be exact. I might have been paraphrasing again. And now it's time to audit the audacity of this week's biggest Bogon emitter. Fletch for Freedom on the Bogosity.tv forum nominates Warren Buffett, who is a rich investment executive making headlines for his repeated calls for government to tax the rich more. In a recent editorial in the New York Times, Buffett makes his point by demonstrating the tried and true method of lying with statistics. While the poor and middle class fight for us in Afghanistan, and while most Americans struggle to make ends meet, we mega-rich continue to get our extraordinary tax breaks. Last year, my federal tax bill, the income tax I paid, as well as payroll taxes paid by me and on my behalf, was $6,938,744. That sounds like a lot of money, but what I paid was only 17.4% of my taxable income, and that's actually a lower percentage than was paid by any of the other 20 people in our office. Their tax burdens ranged from 33% to 41% and averaged 36%. Okay, that sounds reasonable until you consider one thing. If Buffett really does feel this way, why doesn't he voluntarily pay more? All he has to do is go to the Treasury's website and just pay them. The fact that he doesn't smacks of hypocrisy. Come on, Buffett, why don't you lead by example? And what was the basis of his statistics? Did he get aggregate information from the IRS and do a regression analysis of it? No, he asked 20 people he happened to work with. Sorry, Buffett, but the plural of anecdote is not data. Not only that, but later in the article he specifies he's only including personal income tax, so he's excluding capital gains tax, corporate tax, estate tax, gift tax, or Social Security and Medicare taxes. I mean, it's not like you can't just go to the IRS's website and download the data yourself. If you do, you'll find the average taxpayer paid just 12.24% of his taxable income in federal income tax in 2008, the last year the IRS has published the records. And the top 1% paid 22.7% in income tax. So this 17.4% figure of Buffett sounds very fishy indeed. It's almost as if Buffett is deliberately paying less than what he's supposed to, sheltering large portions of his assets in tax-exempt foundations to avoid paying the tax on them. Nah, couldn't be. How much of Buffett's income is from capital gains? The current capital gains tax rate, no matter how rich you are, is 15%. But by his own admission, he's not including capital gains taxes, which are a large part of his income, and that of most rich people as well. Buffett says, quote, "If you make money with money, as some of my super rich friends do, your percentage may be a bit lower than mine. But if you earn money from a job, your percentage will surely exceed mine, most likely by a lot." But since he's clearly not counting the capital gains tax, which is the tax you pay when you make money with money, as Buffett says, this is just so much rhetoric. The proper way to examine this is to look at Buffett's share of the overall tax bill compared to the entire country. In 2009, Warren Buffett's share of the entire country's income was $5.20 for every $1 million of national income, but the amount he paid in income tax was $8 for every $1 million of income tax collected. His taxes were bigger as a percentage than the average tax paid. When he finally does get around to using IRS statistics, he misuses them greatly. Quote, "Since 1992, the IRS has compiled data from the returns of the 400 Americans reporting the largest income. In 1992, the top 400 had aggregate taxable income of $16.9 billion and paid federal taxes of 29.2% on that sum. In 2008, the aggregate income of the highest 400 had soared to $90.9 billion, a staggering $227.4 million on average. But the rate paid had fallen to 21.5%. Here's the thing, when you're dealing with a constant quantity, the 400 highest income earners in this case, percentages actually become misleading. Since the overall number of these taxpayers hasn't changed, it's still 400, then making people's eyes goggle with how much they paid in income in raw dollars, then switching to a percentage is blinding people with pseudoscience. When you look at the raw numbers, then in 1992, the top 400 earners paid $4.9 billion in taxes, and in 2008 it went up to $19.5 billion. These top 400 earners paid 4 times more in taxes than they had before. So why is Buffett's statistics so misleading? Because he doesn't take into consideration the fact that the U.S. population increased over that time. Buffett's analysis is only valid if the population of the U.S. were constant. But it isn't. The population's been rising. In 1992, the population of the United States was 256.5 million, according to the Census Bureau. In 2008, that had increased to 305 million. So in 1992, those 400 top earners represented 1.6 per 1 million population. In 2008, they only represented 1.3 per million. Their portion of the population dropped by almost 19%. When you look at it that way, a drop of only 7.7% in their tax rate tells a whole different story. It's clear that Buffett is just using his position to push the agenda of his government cronies. The fact is, there is no scenario where it's a good idea economically to raise taxes during a recession, and there is absolutely no indication whatsoever that increasing taxes will do anything to help the budget issues. In August of 2009, two economists at Harvard University examined the fiscal policies of OECD countries from 1970 to 2007. They found, quote, fiscal stimuli based on tax cuts are more likely to increase growth than those based on spending increases. As for fiscal adjustments, those based on spending cuts and no tax increases are more likely to reduce deficits and debt over GDP ratios than those based on tax increases. In addition, adjustments on the spending side rather than on the tax side are less likely to create recessions. They also found, quote, according to our results, fiscal stimuli based on tax cuts are much more likely to be growth-enhancing than those on the spending side. In this respect, the U.S. stimulus plan seems too much based upon spending. It is unlikely that these deficits and debts will disappear simply because growth will resume at very rapid pace very soon. The analysis of the present paper suggests that the primary spending needs to be kept under tight control. Otherwise, increasing taxes, running after ever-increasing spending, will not work. So what Buffett and many other liberals are saying needs to be done, raising taxes, particularly on the rich, has never been seen to work in any of these countries at any time in the last 4 decades. But I guess as long as there's political points to be made, Buffett will have no qualms about insisting on higher taxes as long as he himself doesn't have to pay them. And that's more than enough to make him this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now it's time to rouse the risible ridiculousness of this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Michael Stahl is pastor of the Living Water Church in Miramar, Florida. Well, actually, it isn't really in Miramar. In fact, it isn't really a church at all. It's a website and a blog. Stahl just lives in Miramar. He's attempting to start a grassroots organization to start another list of registered offenders in a national database. Modeled after the Sex Offender Registry and the Ex-Convict Registry, because those work so well, he now wants a national registry of, get this, atheists. From Stahl himself, quote, for the same purpose, many states put the names and photos of convicted sex offenders and other ex-felons on the INET to inform the public. I mean, in the city of Miramar, Florida, where I live, the population is approximately 109,000. My family and I would sure like to know how many of those 109,000 are admitted atheists. Perhaps we may actually know some, in which case we could begin to witness to them and warn them of the dangers of atheism. Or perhaps they are radical atheists, whose hearts are as hard as Pharaoh's. In that case, if they are business owners, we would encourage all our Christian friends, as well as the various churches and their congregations, not to patronize them, as we would only be feeding Satan. Yeah, there's absolutely no problem doing that in the land of the free, is there? I mean, it's not like we have a right to privacy or to free association or due process or anything. Stahl certainly doesn't see anything wrong with it. Quote, frankly, I don't see why anyone would oppose this idea, including the atheists themselves, unless, of course, they're actually ashamed of their atheist religion and would prefer to stay in the closet. I think you might have a point here. I mean, why wouldn't you want your personal beliefs known? Maybe he could even require us to wear little red A's as we went out. It's not like this is unprecedented. Why, one time, for purely informational reasons, of course, Jews were required to register and wear a Star of David when they went out. And of course, none of them complained. They weren't ashamed of their religion at all. This was actually done in Germany in 1939. And nothing at all bad came from that, right? You know, if this guy held anything resembling a position of power, I'd be worried that he might become some kind of vicious tyrant. As it is, it seems he's destined for being little more than this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! Well, that wraps up this supernumerary edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and participate in discussions about these subjects and anything else you'd like. And if you'd like to participate in the Bogosity podcast, you can send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. If you put it in an MP3 file, it just might get played in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Isaac Asimov. If I am right, then religious fundamentalists will not go to heaven because there is no heaven. If they are right, then they will not go to heaven because they are hypocrites. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported License.
Bogosity.